So I almost burnt out while working on my webcomic, and I'm going to tell you how not to do that. Hey my squids, it's your favorite cephalopod, the prize winning squid here, back with another video. If you're new here, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. I'm an artist who likes to do illustrations and webcomics, and my webcomic Talia is up on globalcomics.com, Webtoons, my website, artbytheprizewinningsquid.com, and my Patreon, patreon.com/theprizewinningsquid, where, if you are subscribed, you can get everything early. You can see behind the scenes stuff, you can see page videos that'll be coming up there soon, and all that good stuff. So if that is something that you're into, go over there and subscribe. And then on this channel, we talk about art community and art related topics, as well as art drama. No drama this time, but art related drama as well. So if you love that, go ahead and give me a subscription on here as well, and leave me a comment because I love talking to you guys. Anyway, like I said, I almost burnt out while working on my webcomic, but I'm going to tell you guys how not to do that. And this is going to be a slightly different video than what I normally do. This is what I like to call a retrospective video. I'm going to actually talk about this whole year of working on my webcomic, whether it's finished a chapter or not. I've already done this before. I did it, after I finished chapter 1, I talked about that a little bit, but this time I haven't finished chapter 2 as of recording this. I'm 6 pages away from finishing it, but I feel like I have a lot of information that I kind of want to talk to you guys about, kind of go over some of this stuff, because the burnout was so real. And not that I wanted to walk away from the webcomic, but man, it was tough. There's that, but then there's stylistic choices that I think my webcomic is finally coming into a place where I'm like really happy about where I want to go stylistically, both with the art and things like dialogue bubbles, captions, and showcasing some stuff for the readers to kind of latch onto. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is world building, because world building for your webcomic or anything that you're creating is infinitely important. I want to both show you guys some of the stuff that I've done, but also talk about some of the stuff that I think could help other people world build. Some of them are things that I've done as well, so I think that'll work. This is going to be divided up into 3 sections. I'm going to actually have chapters that you guys can click on, so if you want to go to that specific chapter and just listen to me yap about that, you can. I'm also going to have some page speed paints up on the screen so you guys can watch the time lapses of me actually putting some of these pages together. I'm not going to talk about the pages specifically, but you guys will actually get to see some of the stuff that I'm kind of referencing. They will be pages from chapter 1 and chapter 2 kind of intermingled, kind of like put in there. So if you're looking for one specific type of page, or you're looking for only chapter 2 stuff or only chapter 1 stuff, you might have to skip around a little bit for that, but I'm going to be just talking about these kind of general things. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the burnout, because the burnout was real. So burnout. Earlier this year, I was burned out working on my webcomic. So quick recap, because like I said, I already did a whole video on the retrospective of working on chapter 1. But what I was talking about in chapter 1 was I essentially was telling you guys how I came up with the idea of Talia, the main characters, how I'd kind of figured out what the plot would be, just kind of putting the whole thing together, and different things that I was trying to figure out artistically, with the series, with how I wanted the webcomic to look, the fact that I went with a webcomic as opposed to a comic book, because originally it was going to be a comic book, and then became the webcomic, and everything like that. The schedule that I picked, why I picked it, all of this. So the schedule that I originally had for my webcomic was every other week, and that was public release, and it was every other Friday. And for a while, it was a schedule that I kind of kept up with, right? The other thing is that Patreon would be minimum 2 pages ahead of the public release. That was something that I always wanted to keep in mind. So generally speaking, I was about 4 pages ahead from public release, because I would have like 2 in the chamber for Patreon, and then there would be the 2 that Patreon could see that public had not yet seen. So keep that in mind. I want you to know that I was like a month and a half out from when the public would see stuff. The problem with doing every other week, and let me backtrack. When I tell people to make a webcomic, because I will suggest that every artist should do a webcomic, even if it is a very short run webcomic, because what it does is it helps you manage timelines, track your speed, see like how fast are you at doing certain things. but it also can take you out of your comfort zone so that you can actually make different stuff. If you're not good at backgrounds, maybe force yourself to work on backgrounds. And that's something that doing a webcomic, you have to kind of start trying to work on backgrounds. Maybe you're not good at vehicles. Try to have a couple vehicles in there. See what you can do with that. Maybe you're not good with like face close-ups and stuff like that. Try that, right? So doing a webcomic, I think, is fundamentally just great for artists, because you can figure out what you are and aren't good at, but also you can kind of like work on those things and kind of like see different stuff you're working on. But pick a schedule that makes sense, because this is not, and what I'm about to say is not disrespectful in any way, shape, or form, but unless you are a kid, you don't have free time. You don't have the free time that you think you do. And I think a lot of people fall into seeing webtoon artists release twice a week, or the end of the week or something like that, and they think, if I want people to read my stuff, I have to release like that. No, you don't. Because the reality is that somebody who finds your webcomic 10 years from now doesn't care if you released every other week. They're gonna read it however far it is, and if you've burned out to the point that you're not making it anymore, you didn't finish it, then they're probably gonna read up to a point and be like, oh, I see that I have like 5 pages left and the end of the story doesn't look like it's here. I'm gonna stop reading. Make it so that you can actually finish your webcomic, one, but two, realize that you're not just making the webcomic for people who are going to read it day and date that it's released, but for people who are going to read it years down the line. There are webcomics that I still have bookmarks to that I read. I go back and I read because I loved them, and the person's not publishing them anymore. It's finished. They might have moved on to something else, or they might not even be making webcomics anymore, but that still lives in perpetuity, and I can go back and read their webcomics. So keep that in mind when you pick your schedule. Also realize that you have limited time, right? So if for a fact it takes you 24 hours, to put something together, that's going to take you almost a week. And that means that as soon as you finish that, if you don't start on the next thing, you're going to already be behind. And eventually you're going to burn out and you're going to walk away from your webcomic. This almost happened to me. And you can see very specifically at the beginning of chapter 2. So what happened is I finished chapter 1, and there was a 2-month time span, almost 3-month time span between finishing chapter 1 and the release of chapter 2 for the public. But what that means is that I had to put stuff together and that Patreon could still see this stuff. So they weren't getting releases every 2 weeks. It would just be like, if I finished a page, I would put it up and they'd be able to see it within that 2.5 month time span before it went public. But I needed to make sure that I had enough pages for Patreon to see it. So that was kind of one of the issues, right? But the other thing is that during that time span, I finished, I think, the first 3 pages of chapter 2. And if you look at the first 3 pages, I love these pages, showing the seat of power, so showing how big it is compared to other buildings, like the archives that are like almost in front of it, showing how big it is in relation to other things in the city of Jaisha, and that zoom in to Xavier at the piano and him playing and having an interaction with the narrator, and then the next page where Bourne kind of bursts into the room and walks up to Xavier. I felt like this was a very, very strong intro. And then after that, all the way until Zelani and Micah show back up in the comic, was some of my worst work. And I am not going to pull any punches. I don't like that part of the comic. I'm not going to go back and redraw it, but it's not my strongest artwork. And I think that it shows, because I was on this every other week schedule. And the problem is that with an every other week schedule, it meant that as soon as I finished a page, I essentially had to start crafting another page, right? So every other Friday I was releasing, I was going to have to craft another page. And that meant that I didn't have time to do studies. I didn't have time to do other illustrations. I didn't even have time to like write on scripts or work on character sheets or anything like that. And if I was having to speed run that while also trying to do a page or trying to get 2 pages done. Because at some point in time, I was like, man, I want to have 1 to 2 pages every other week. That's that's not something that I can actually do and put any good quality, any good effort into it. And plus, there was some things that I was doing back then in terms of techniques that I think took longer to do than what I'm doing now. So back then, I would sketch the whole page, refine the sketches, ink the whole page, next day color the whole page, next day shadow and light the whole page. And I don't know if my brain just hates having to do that, having to do something and knowing that, okay, I have to come back and finish the whole thing again. But what I do now is I work on a single panel, sketch it, ink it, color it, light and shadow. So when I, open up the project again the next day, a whole panel is done. I know I don't have to ever touch that panel again, right? Well, to do dialogue and stuff, draw boxes and everything, but I don't have to touch it again. So that was another thing that I kind of changed in how I did the webcomic, because now my brain is going, oh, you finished that, cool, we can move on to the next thing. I don't know why that works for me, but it does. Some people it might not work, but back then I was doing whole page. And at some point in time, I realized that this was not sustainable for the future. I didn't like how the art was looking in, the first half of the chapter of chapter 2. I realized that I had gone back to doing like the cell shading, but even then, it felt like things didn't look as great as they could. And I wasn't spending a lot of time doing, art studies and kind of working with other things and trying to figure out, hey, how do I make something look better? I was also I wasn't using like textured lines. So all of my inking back then was very like solid line inking, which can work and it can look good. But where I was gravitating towards and kind of what I ended up going with as the year progressed was like more textured lines. And I'll talk about that in the next section, but the textured line look kind of helped my brain see things a little bit better and kind of not get lost in the weeds, right? But the biggest thing is that the every other week schedule just didn't allow me time to breathe. I either had to work on the page or the page was going to be late, or it was just not going to be, it wasn't going to look as good. Or if there was a mistake in the page that I needed to correct, I didn't have time to actually like walk away from it, come back and go, I got to fix that. That doesn't look good. Because by the time I walked away and came back, the page had to be published. And yeah, it's a webcomic, so I can always go back and fix things. But because I had to be working on the next page, I couldn't go back to fix those things. And that became very like apparent in those first couple of pages. So the first 3 pages of chapter 3, great. The pages of Born and Xavier after that, all the way up into Zolani and Micah, not great. I will be 100 with you. I don't like them. There might be people who will like pull punches and be like, no, I think the art's okay, and talking about their own creations. I will be 100 with you and say, I don't like the way my pages look there. I think they can look better. And I think as you look in the rest of chapter 2, you realize, oh yeah, they could have looked infinitely better. Because some of my best work is in the rest of chapter 2. So the fact that those pages look like that is very like, it hurts the soul, but I'm not going to go fix them because that was a point in time that I was creating that, right? So I ended up making a post and saying, hey, I'm not quitting working on the webcomic, but I need to take a couple months and kind of reevaluate how to do this and do this in a healthy manner. Because as an artist, there's times where I really just want to work on something else. I really just want to work on like just, a commission, or I want to work on something stupid that I've had in my head for like the longest. Or I have an idea for multiple other comics that are one-shots. They're 20 pages long. But with that schedule, I didn't have time to work on them. And I said, when I come back, I'm going to release once a month, last Friday of every month, and you're going to get however many pages there are. Patreon gets pages early, but not like a month ahead or anything. They just, when I finish the page, they go up on Patreon, and then at the end of the month, everybody gets to see them. What Patreon also gets is just like more behind the scenes work and other things that they will get to see. Like the cover for chapter 3 has been up for 5 months now. So there's different things that Patreon kind of gets that public doesn't get as often, right? And I was like, that's how I'm going to kind of spin it. And doing that, when I took my break, because I took a break for like 2.5 months, almost 3 months. The first 3 weeks, I played video games. I didn't do any art. I did read comic books. I read a couple novels. Played video games. Played on my iPad a lot. Didn't really do much else. And that was a refresher, because by the end of 3 weeks, the hunger that I had to work on webcomics again and work on Talia was like at a fevered pitch. And I jumped in and I finished 5 pages. So when I came back, I had more pages ready than when I left. And they looked infinitely better. So that first page was Zelania Mica. It does look better than pages, previous pages before, but then you see the progression of how much better they start getting. And that's when I realized this schedule right here allows me time to do illustrations, and it allows me time to go and play video games and just do whatever else for a little bit, but also do studies, because I was doing more anatomy studies. I was doing like head studies. I was doing like eye studies, perspective studies. I was trying to figure out how to make things look better in my comic. And then I was also working on just random backgrounds. Like I would just draw random backgrounds, and a lot of them weren't finished, but I would just draw them. And it was because drawing a background is something you have to do when you're making a webcomic. So I was like, I might as well try to get decent at this thing. And when I released them, I was like, I've never released 5 pages at once that wasn't, the start of a chapter, or, when I first actually started the webcomic. And this is doable. And since then, I've released 2 to 3 pages every single month, which is amazing. I think maybe 1 month I only released 1 page. And it's because I did more illustrations that month. But I didn't feel guilty, because, hey, a page got released. I was able to do a ton of illustrations. So here's a bunch of my other art that you get to see. And there was other behind the scenes stuff. I was also working on scripts. I've been able to write my scripts out much further because of this new schedule. And there's other things that I've been able to do. We'll talk about that in the world building aspect that I would have never done with, or been able to do with, the old schedule. So bottom line, find a schedule that works for you, because if you don't, this thing that you want to do will get away from you, will consume you, and it becomes not fun. And when I say that working on it is insanely fun again, I mean, I came back in, I think, May of 2025. It's the end of December 2025 now. And I'm literally working on pages that will be released in January. I'm in December working on January pages. That's how excited I am about working on this again. And there's things that I've been able to do at the beginning of December that I would have never been able to do with the old schedule. So bottom line is, if you're working on a webcomic, you have to figure out a good schedule for you. Because if you don't, you're going to end up burning out. And you're not going to be able to do all the other things that you want to do artistically. And don't you want to finish your story? I mean, it's good. You have to finish your story, but you have to also be in the mindset that finishing the story is something that you can actually do. If you don't feel like you can, or you feel for some reason that you have to release everything quickly, you're going to burn out. I almost did. I'm glad that I changed my schedule. And honestly, I want to see how this schedule works with chapter 3 and going forward, because there might come a time when I realize, I can actually change it to I'll release every 2 months, right? It's not about releasing quickly. It's about just having a consistent schedule, for your releases, so people have something to look forward to. So mine is last Friday of every month. So it doesn't matter what the date is. The date will change, but it's just the last Friday of every month. You'll know that Talia gets put up. However many pages are there, it'll get put up. And so burnout doesn't feel like a real thing anymore, because now I have built-in breaks that allow me to completely recoup mentally and in some ways physically, so I'm not shrimp-shaped. I'm squid-shaped. All right, so let's talk about finding an art style. All right, so we are going to talk about webcomics and art style. And I am notorious for saying that art style is a myth. It is just a collection of techniques that you change over time, or you refine, or you figure out how to do something else with them, right? The only time that you need to match a style is if you're working on somebody else's stuff. You're working in their production environment, or maybe you're working on their comic and you need to match what they've done before. That's the only time that a style matters. You will not find your art style. I'm doing everything in quotes. I am serious. You will not find your art style. What you're basically going to end up finding are just techniques that you really, really like. And as you continue just doing art, over time, you're going to have stuff that just kind of, people will be able to be like, oh, that's your work. I literally have had people go, did Squid do the cover for this album? Or oh man, did Squid do this? And it's like, yeah. So people can notice my stuff at this point. That's neither here nor there. What I want to talk about with webcomics is that a lot of people will not start their webcomic because they go, I can't find the best look for my webcomic. I'm going to be 300% with you. What you do at the first pages of your webcomic will not look like the last pages of your webcomic. And if they do, one, I hope your webcomic is very short. It's a one shot. You did it really quickly. But two, I'm going to be very, very worried that the very beginning of your webcomic and the very end of your webcomic look exactly the same, especially if it's over the course of years, because then you didn't have any artistic growth, or maybe you just like shoehorned or like strapped yourself to whatever you were doing back there and you were like, I'm never deviating from this, which can be good and bad. I mean, it just depends on who you are as a person. But me personally, I'm gonna say that your webcomic at the very beginning and your webcomic at the very end will not look the exact same. So I have Clip Studio Paint open here. These are going to be actual pages that I've worked on. The whole point of this isn't to do anything more than show you how different my webcomic in chapter 1 looked between pages in chapter 1 and what I'm doing now in chapter 2. So in chapter 1, I'm going to switch to, this is a chapter 2 page, but in chapter 1, let me find it, this one. So as you can see in this page, there are very solid black lines for the background, for all the black background elements. There is cell shading. So like I said, at the beginning of chapter 1, I was doing cell shading, right? There is cell shading here. There is, besides obviously the artwork doesn't look amazing, there is some texture that I did to the colors, you know, for the background colors. So the building has some texture to it. That's actually a whole different layer that I did for the texture. My caption boxes, you can tell like the narrator is in kind of like the yellowish color, and then later is in the green color. There's different things that I've done here, right? And then if we kind of scroll in, because I'm going to scroll in a little bit here, if you notice that the lines are very, very smooth. So I did a lot of smooth lines with the early pages. And there was a reason for that, because back then that's what I thought I wanted for the actual, you know, the webcomic, for the sensibilities of the webcomic. And then over time, in chapter 1, I ended up going with more of a soft shadow look. So this is further in chapter 1. We have the caption boxes of narration from Leira again, because she's in green. We have her crying. The art does look much better, so it is obvious that I was getting better at art in this aspect, but I did soft shadows, and because of that, it took a little bit longer to kind of do this page. There are some other things you can notice. You know, you can notice that at least around like the eyes and stuff, that there are some, you know, the lines are a little bit smaller, a little bit thinner on certain parts. And then for the background lines, same thing, is still the black for the background lines and things like that. So there was some choices that I made in these early pages that obviously now that I'm further in, I'm no longer making, right? So let's go to, let me click on, not that one, let's click on this one. All right, so this is a chapter 2 page. So in chapter 2, one of the things that I started kind of doing after I did my initial couple pages with Xavier and Bourne is that time off, I had been experimenting a lot with like textured brushes. And with the textured brushes, they give the edge of objects just kind of like, you know, that kind of grit to it. And that is something that I absolutely love in comics. A lot of the comics that I read end up having some of that grit. I won't say that comics that I read don't have smooth lines. A lot of them do. But there are a lot of comics that I read that have like a little grit to them. It looks like somebody just had a pencil and they just were in there sketching. I wanted that look. And so I experimented with that look on, not even on the pages of my webcomic, but just in random illustrations while I was on that break, that sabbatical, because at the end of the day, I was like, I want to introduce this, but I want it to make sense, and I need to figure out how to kind of integrate it into my comic. The other thing that I started kind of figuring out is that backgrounds do not have to be like solid. You know, like the background lines can be much thinner. And the page that we just flipped off of, before we came to this one, I'll show you what I mean by that. But so on this page, we have Leira's mom, Cora, and then we have this unnamed man here who is kind of just, you know, telling her like, we have to go, right? And then I kind of made a new brush where it's this kind of whatever this brush, you know, it has like the little edges to it. It's kind of nice looking. If we zoom in on this guy's shoulder, we can see that the edge lines are a little bit more, you know, got a little bit more kind of grit to them a little bit. But then also you can tell mostly in kind of like where the sleeve is. And you can see that inside of the lines themselves, it more looks like a pencil as opposed to like very hard ink. And that was something that I very much wanted to do. But also the other thing you can notice is that the color matches his color more than just being black. So that was another thing that I started kind of changing. You can see it better in young Leira here. You can see it along the eyes, in her eyes, along where the hair is, that the color matches the color it's on a little bit better than previously. And then of course in this page, the art is like infinitely better. A really good example of what I'm talking about and how things will change is that even from this page, which is close to the end of chapter 2, I still made some different changes between that and this page. That is a page that is more I released more recently, right? So the first thing, I'm gonna come up here to the top and I'm gonna zoom in. So the background work, right? The first thing that you'll notice is that I have a lot of grit to the edge lines of the background work, but also, even though it appears there's a texture, it's not a texture. This is just gouache. So I stopped color filling my backgrounds, and instead I just use gouache paint over my backgrounds, and it creates a textured look, which I don't know why I didn't do this before. I was doing this in some illustrations, and that's when I was like, you know what, I'm gonna start doing this in the webcomic, and I love the way it looks. The other thing you'll notice is that the lines are a lot, especially for the background, the lines are a lot thinner. They're not as heavy. And one of the other things you'll notice is that I just kind of add little lines here and there. Even in some of these backgrounds, like for instance, where Leira is in front of a lady and she's scanning like her wallet, which has a nice little heart on it. There is like, you see the little texture from the gouache over parts of it. And then for some of these lines, you also can tell that the lines have a little bit of weight to them. And that there's kind of like a little bit of texture to some of the lines here. And then just further in the background, instead of making backgrounds super complicated, I would make them a little bit simpler. And that way, you know, you can focus on Leira here, you can focus on, you know, some of the words and things like that. And then of course the people that she was talking to are in the background. They're entering another little tunnel here and all that good stuff. But the other thing is, you'll notice the crowds, unless they're really close, I just had the blacked out figures. I just was like, you know what? You're gonna understand that these are crowds, that the crowds are in the train station. That's what it is. I'm not gonna worry about making a million different people doing a million different things, right? And I think that helps speed up my process infinitely by doing that. The other thing, so in chapter 1, right, I had a certain thing that I wanted for chapter 1. right? And this is part of world building, but I want to talk about it here. Both the finding the art style thing, but also kind of like figuring out how your webcomic is going to progress. So in chapter 1, obviously when I made Leira, there was like a certain aspect that I wanted to have for her. So at first, her internal voice and the voice that I was using for her was more of like, kind of like mine, just a Northern American accent, everything, you know, nothing too crazy. If you live in Northern America, I sound just normal. But then I was like, you know what? It would be kind of cool if, because of where she's from, at the time I was calling it Aberrogue. That's going to be important here in a second. But because of where she was from, I was like, it'd be kind of cool if she had kind of like an Appalachian accent. And so, well, I'm skipping ahead here. She actually had a Scottish accent for a second, but I realized I can't write in a Scottish accent the whole time because I'm not Scottish. And while I do have Scottish friends, I can't just continuously ask them to check that my dialogue is correct in how I'm writing her, because that's going to be exceptionally annoying without paying somebody to specifically do that. But two, I wanted it to be consistent, you know, and make sure that I'm doing something that isn't just like I'm trying to randomly use something, right? And so after that, I was like, well, I can make an Appalachian kind of accent. I have tons of Appalachian friends. I do live in the Appalachia area, so it's something that I hear constantly, and I'm able to like kind of pick up on and like add that to what I'm doing. But then I got to thinking, and this is when I started, this is going to be part of the world building segment too, but I started making playlists of music for the characters. And then I got into this idea that Leira should actually have because somebody's already mentioned her accent, maybe we have, you know, something about that accent, and the area she's from, Aberrogue, is not Aberrogue, but it's Aberroche, right? Aberroche. And I was like, hold on, what if I just make a whole different language? So ended up doing all of that. Well, what I had to do was I had to go back to chapter 1 and make sure that all of her dialogue was consistent. So I do these things called the definitive versions of these chapters. They're basically the versions that when I send these off to be printed as actual physical comic books, these are the versions that will go, and they will be the final versions of these chapters. The artwork doesn't change. It's just fixing up some of the dialogue stuff, especially in chapter 1. And then in chapter 2, there's going to be some additional stuff that I'm going to be doing. We're going to be talking about that in a second. But essentially, I went back, made sure that her dialogue was good, made sure Micah and Zolani's dialogue was good, consistent. There had been some other changes that I had made. For instance, Saul originally was just some guy, was like a coworker, and then now Saul is very integrated into Leira's life. And so I had to go back and make sure that the way she talked about him was consistent to somebody who would be instrumental in your life and very important to you, as opposed to how I had originally released it, where it was just kind of like, oh, you know, we just have flings kind of deal. He's more than that, you know, he's like more important to her life than just, you know, they spend romantic time together or whatever. Even if that's very complicated, you'll see more of that in chapter 3 and how she kind of responds to that and why his death is affecting her overall, right? So went back, fixed all of that, but then that got me thinking. I was like, I've been reading books and I've been reading webcomics lately that use boxes for dialogue. So instead of bubbles, boxes. And it appears to save a lot of space. So I decided I wanted to do that. I wanted to switch my dialogue from bubbles to boxes. And I wanted these dialogue bubbles, the boxes, to have grit to them. I wanted them to look a certain way. So this was a previous page that we just looked at, and I did a test. I went through and I've done a dialogue test, and as you can see, we'll zoom in here. We have a lot more grit around this bubble. We have where this one specifically isn't saving space. I drew it a little bit bigger than was necessary. But essentially, these will save more space, especially in instances where I have like a ton of dialogue that is being said. These save infinitely more space than the bubbles, right? And I was like, well, I kind of want to do that with the captions as well. So I did this test, and I liked the way that this ended up coming out. So then I went and I did captions. And so for the captions, it was slightly different. I was like, there's some things that I kind of want to mess with here, right? There's the narrator caption. I'm gonna pull this down just a little bit. There's the narrator caption where, okay, maybe it has kind of an outline to it. Do I want the captions to have outlines? I'm still playing with that, so I haven't figured that out just yet. But the dialogue, I know I will have black around the dialogue boxes. But with the captions, something I kind of was thinking, I was like, I kind of want to mess with this. What if I do talking heads? What if in the future multiple characters are talking via the captions, narrating as if the story is over, and they're kind of recapping the stuff that's happened, but you don't know who's talking? And I was like, well, what if I did different colors for the captions? And I was like, well, at some point in time that's going to get a little confusing, because what if there's multiple people talking, right? I was like, but what if I just do actual talking heads, and I just have these little cute heads there where the person is actually talking? Will it work? I have no idea. I haven't added it, to the webcomic yet. I don't know how detailed it would be. Would I only have it for the one caption, and then the rest of the captions you just assume is that person, the same way that you do when you have somebody speaking another language? Or like, how would that work? And so that was something that I'm toying with. I haven't yet figured out if that's what I want to do. And that's kind of the point, is that your webcomic is going to change over time. You're going to figure out different things that do and don't work for your webcomic over time. But that's what it is. It's the over time. You're not going to figure out everything on the first page of your webcomic. There is going to be years from now where you add something in your webcomic that was never in there before, but now it makes the webcomic feel better. For me, one of the things is that with the new ways that I'm doing backgrounds, the ways that characters look, the new techniques that I'm using for my characters in terms of line weights and line coloring and things like that. One of the biggest things that I wanted to make sure that I was doing was that dialogue and caption boxes also feel like they reside in that world, where some of these boxes and the dialogue and the caption boxes didn't feel like they resided as well as I wanted them to. But now I feel like they do. That's just something that happens over time. You have to take time to work on your webcomic to make sure that you're getting to that point. Things like the art having more of a little grit to it, as opposed to what I was doing before. So now with the characters are color filled, right? I have a whole tool that I use to color fill characters, and then I do the cell shading on the characters, but the backgrounds are all gouache. And I think that marries the two together even better, especially now that the characters have a certain look to them, and they still have that kind of gritty edge to their lines, and then the backgrounds also have that grit, that texture, and that edge. And I think going forward, it'll only look better and better and better as I start refining even more details and more elements. And I get better at doing backgrounds and doing, objects and stuff like that, and figuring out what do shadows look like? How are they dithered? Is there a soft shadow in this area? Maybe there are some shadows, that are softer in this area, and not everything is cell shaded. I can marry the two things together. Lighting, I don't just do cell shaded highlights. I actually use kind of a soft brush to kind of brush some of the lighting in. So that's kind of adding to the look of characters as well. So it's one of those things where you can't just assume that just because you're doing something on page 1, that's what you'll be doing on the last page, right? It's a webcomic. It's going to change over time. And so you're going to discover these things over time. You can't let not having everything in place stop you. You will figure it out. Even if it's years from now, you will figure something out. And I think that's part of what this process is figuring stuff out. And now that I have this process, one of the things that I am going to do is go back into chapter 2 at the very beginning, and I'm going to change the way captions look. I'm going to change the way that dialogue looks. Why? So it's consistent in chapter 2 with these changes. I've already added these dialogue bubbles into one of the released pages now. But in chapter 3, it'll always be this. But then there might be something new that shows up in chapter 3, then I'm like, ah man, I'm gonna want to do that in chapter 4, and so on and so forth. It's just about the discovery. It's about figuring out what works for you, what works for your comic, and then just keep going. You don't stop. So the next part we're going to talk about world building. All right, so now we are on to world building. World building is the absolute bedrock of doing anything comic related. Let's be real. Webcomics, you are going to world build. Whether you have a world that is all original and you need to explain everything, or whether things take place on Earth of today and you don't really need to explain much, maybe just the surroundings for the characters and maybe what their life is, you're going to do a little bit of world building. And I'm going to be honest with you, you're going to have different ways that you do it. Now, a lot of people will do the high level world building. You'll have the overarching plot, then you'll have all of the villains and the heroes, and you kind of try to over explain like tons and tons of stuff. But I am here to tell you that the simplest way to world build is to do the opposite. And we're going to do that today with Lyra. What I'm talking about is that you need to take one character, doesn't matter who the character is, and do a day in the life. I'm not talking about a day in the life with the plot alongside of it, a day in the life before all of this even began, because this will help you build up your world. So we're going to do this experiment with Lyra. I'm going to show you exactly how I started world building some of this stuff and explain some of the stuff. So before we jump into that, I'm going to give you just some quick kind of like backstory or side note or whatever about Lyra. First of all, her name is Lyra Marie Orta, and she is a 28-year-old thaumaturge mammologist. That word is so hard for me. I can type it and saying it is so difficult. But she is a thaumaturge mammologist, meaning that she goes and she researches and looks at and tracks magical mammals, mostly rodents, canines, that kind of thing, but there are a ton of other animals that she tracks. She is familiar with insects and stuff like that, but she doesn't always study them, right? So that's what she does for work. She's also an elemental, and an elemental in this world essentially is just somebody who is innate at being able to use magic, right? So maybe a sorcerer, a mage, something like that, you know, some equivalency of that. We're not going based on D&D rules or nothing like that. It's just somebody who can use magic. They call them elementals in this world because elementalism is the study of innate magic, right? At least in that form. So we have all that kind of in the eggshell. Let's start a day in the life of Lyra Orta. So she wakes up, and when you're doing this, you're going to ask yourself questions. Every time there's either a scene change or an action, you want to ask yourself why such and such is happening, right? So she wakes up. Couple questions we need to answer. How does she wake up? Alarm clock. So with an alarm clock, if she wakes up, is it a rooster? Is it a normal alarm clock? Is it holographic? Is it just like a bell pill somewhere in the distance? Like, what is it that she wakes up with? Well, she wakes up with a normal alarm clock. There are holographic alarm clocks in this world, but the alarm clock she wakes up is just a normal, has a digital readout, and so she just wakes up, right? Well, what part of it wakes her up? Is it the dinging or is it something else? Well, the radio turns on and it starts playing music. It's actually the DJ announcing the next song. So she gets up, checks her phone. Her phone is just like a normal looking smartphone, right? Okay, so we're now establishing that this pretty much takes place in a time period like our own. Cool. What kind of music's on the radio? It's heavy metal. So she's a metalhead. She is indeed. So now we've answered a couple questions about Lyra. We've answered questions about what time period it is. If it wasn't for the phone part, we'd be like, okay, so it's heavy metal. That means it's pretty much around like our time period because heavy metal is still a thing. So she gets up. She's in her apartment. Okay, what's the apartment look like? Well, it's a 2-bedroom apartment, has a kitchen, 2 bathrooms, living room, kind of a dining room, living room combination, and she lives alone. She's in the master bedroom, which, has clothes kind of strung over the floor and on one of the little chairs in there or whatever. But overall, she's a clean person, so it's not like disgustingness everywhere. It's just a normal lived-in space. And then the other bedroom is actually her studio. Why is it her studio, you ask? Okay, well, because she used to be a guitarist. So there's guitars in there. There's guitars hanging on her wall in her bedroom. There's a guitar in the living room as well. She has band posters, some stuff that has her, featured on it, hanging up. So she used to be in a band. She played and plays guitar. Awesome. Okay, so we're answering some more questions about that. Okay, so what does she do next? She's getting ready for work. Well, what's she wearing? The outfit that she's wearing is a green button-down shirt. It has the emblem of her work on it. Okay, so it's a work uniform, correct. And then she's got khakis on. And she goes in the bathroom, gets ready, so on and so forth. And when she leaves, she grabs her backpack and her keys. Okay, cool. So she's leaving. Does she have a car? Is she going to take her car? She does have a car, but she's not going to take her car. So she leaves her crystal battery behind. And so now I hear you going, a crystal battery? What? So in this world, cars take crystal batteries. They don't take your key. It's a crystal battery that you put on the charger when you get home. You take it out. It only works for each, for your individual car. So it's just like a key. You can't use somebody else's key. Use your crystal battery, you plug it into your car, and your car goes. So cars are almost electric in this world, right? Another explanation about the crystal battery is Lyra can actually charge it by herself. She doesn't need to plug it in. So if she, was running late or something and didn't have time to plug it in or something, she would grab it, and on the way down, she would charge it using her magic abilities, because that's what she can do. But she's not going to take it. And the reason why is because when she gets downstairs, she gets out of her apartment building. She's standing on the sidewalk, and there's, cars coming and going. But she's going to walk to the train station because the city that she lives in, Jaisha, actually has mass transit everywhere. The mass transit is 1, fast, 2, exceptionally safe, 3, you can pretty much get into a station almost every other block, right? So she's just going to walk, and it's going to take her downtown to work, which is much faster than if she tried to drive. And in Jaisha, there's about 100 different districts, and the district she lives in is called Glen Springs. So she's going to walk there. On her left is the sign for her building, and it says Glen Springs Estates, and then right underneath it is a whole different language. So hold on. Why is there a different language? Because Lyra, her first language is not the equivalent of English, which is called Procreate in Talia. It is Aborosian. She speaks a whole different language, which is the reason why most people would be like, you have an accent. She does have an accent, and she kept that accent because when her family moved to Jaisha, her father, who hates his Aborosian heritage, hates his accent, and is also trying to ascend, or at the time was trying to ascend in the military. He's now the head honcho of the military. He wanted to get rid of that accent. And because her and her father had a falling out, she emancipated herself from him when she was 15. She retained that accent because it was the closest thing that she had from her mom, besides the letters that her mom's sending her. So she still has her accent. She speaks another language. She is very fluent in Procreate. So Procreate and Aborosian are both, her fluency is 100% in both of those. She's been speaking Procreate since she was a kid, since she was like 8 years old. And so she's, very familiar with it, but she retains her accent because she loves her accent, and it keeps that connection to her Aborosian heritage and also her mother. And so the language that you see is Aborosian. Also, the radio station was all in Aborosian. So everything that she does every day, she speaks this language, right? So she goes to the train station. She gets on the train, and over the intercom, there's Procreate, there's Aborosian being spoken. There's other languages like Wathra, Shara, and Aina, which are some of the other languages that are in this world. And some of them, are more developed, that I've developed them further in terms of like vocabulary than some of the others. Some of them it's just like the mention that's what it is. So Wathra would be kind of like a Germanic kind of language. Aborosian would be not. So when I say kind of, it's not the equivalent, but if they were transported to our world with a language equivalence, this is what it would be. So Wathra would be German, German with some Russian kind of shoehorned into it. Aborigine would be Spanish, Portuguese, and like some of the way grammar is done in Japanese. Procolish would pretty much be like American English. There probably would be some others. Shara would be kind of like tangentially related to Arabic. And so Aina would be tangentially related to Mandarin Chinese, Korean, and Japanese shoehorned together. So they're not one-to-one. And there are different, like there would be like some Thai into, Thai in Aina, in Vietnamese and Aina. So it's not a one-to-one. These are very much like grouped together kind of languages, but she speaks, too fluently, and she has some fluency in some of the others because of her job and just the fact that she does like language. So she goes to work, and when she goes to work, she's on the train and she looks at her phone, and the friend that she had heard on the radio, had been texting her. So you see the language, in Aborigine on her phone, and there's other, people talking other languages or whatever on her phone. Like Saul pretty much talks in Procolish. He's trying to learn Aborigine, but he is not very versed in it. He is very stuttery in it, but she appreciates that he actually cares and he's trying. And so she goes downtown to where she works, which is the archive. And so the question about where does she work? Well, it's the archive. The archive, you can think of the archive as like the Smithsonian, in the sense that the Smithsonian isn't just one place. It is multiple places spread out across a vast array of buildings, right? But the building she works in, the department that she's in, is ecological and zoological classification. So her job is essentially to go study animals, and then once she studied the animals, write down things like their behaviors, where they were, what they were eating, the time of year, the time of day, all of this information. She uses the celestial constellation to be able to do all of that. So that kind of explains what the celestial constellation's role in her job would be, and why she would have to come back and look at it, right? And so you keep going forward. What's on her desk? You can describe her desk, the reports there. Saul comes in and he says, "Oh, I'm not working in this department today. I'm going to be working, in a different department," because Saul is not actually in ecological and zoological classification. He's in a department called the Organizational Collective, and they essentially collate everything that everybody does across the entire archives, and they make sure that it is organized, it is put where it needs to be researched, and that's their job. And so he's really good at this, which then explains why she would go to him when she looks in a book and there's a star that is not supposed to be there. She would go to him and go, "Hold on, this doesn't make sense," because not only is his job being part of the group that collates these things, puts them together, and then puts them on shelves for people to find, but he's also very well versed in the celestial constellation, and he would know whether that star was supposed to be there or not. So that kind of explains some more things for the plot. And then maybe like they go to lunch, and then you can explain that she is not vegan, she's not vegetarian, but she doesn't eat a ton of meat. She eats meat here and there, while Saul is, over here, he's got everything slathered on like a sub or whatever, ham, roast beef, turkey, mayo, just everything. I'm getting hungry now, but he's over there eating, and everything feels very much like these two have a relationship that one of them very much wants to be a relationship. The other one is like, I'm kind of scared to be that because of how I've been treated in the past by my family and maybe some other people, right? Awesome. So all of this stuff now makes sense, right? Doing this, I've ended up building up a whole bunch of things that explains things in this world. And now I have what potentially could be potential plot points, right? So going back to the car aspect. Okay, so they use crystal batteries for the cars. All right. Well, what if they can't find the right crystal battery? Could Lara then take, the ends of the car and jumpstart it and just keep it going? Could she be the crystal battery? So there's now plot points that could be added based on things that that I've put together in just, you know, this simple, what a day in the life of Lara would be. And so you can do the same thing with your characters, and it will help you explain so many other things, because as soon as you have these things kind of explained, you don't have to like drill down from the top of the plot to figure out why this thing at the very top of the plot is there, because you already have this established part down here that kind of explains and expands to the top of your plot. And so I know other people use other world building tactics to kind of like figure things out. This is one of the things that has fundamentally helped me figure out certain things for certain characters. You know, like Zolani and Micah are going to have some things in one of these future chapters here really, really soon that kind of explains a lot of why Zolani is feeling the way that she is feeling about what they're actually doing. So it starts explaining some of these things, and you kind of see this as parts of where the plot could go and how the plot kind of got formed. And so you should do it for as many characters as you can, right? Because it can help explain things. And then once you have things in place, you can actually start expanding without having to do a day in the life, right? So for instance, I have Xavier, and Xavier is one of those characters that was introduced very, very late in the process. And the question that Xavier was made to answer was, well, who is watching the goings on, right? And of course, you know, Bourne is part of that, but Xavier would be part of that. Who would be watching Bourne and who would be watching Xavier? And so that ended up getting explained there. And then there's going to be another character that shows up very, very soon, where my question was, who was then watching the powerful people? And so each time that something was added, it was because a question had to be answered. And I was doing a day in the life. What does Xavier do on a day in the life of Xavier Nib? And answering that question ended up opening up all these plot points that I hadn't originally thought of when I was, you know, penning this and writing the scripts and kind of like thinking about where the story could go. And now that this is part of what this is part of the story and is very crucial part of the story, there are now other plot points that have been added based off of these characters now existing. And to me, that's the best part of writing. That's the best part of creation, is coming up with new things that will, maybe they don't seem like they actually interact with your initial cast of characters, but eventually you come back and it intertwines and it blows your mind how this all came together. And literally it was just, I needed to answer, what does this character do on a day-to-day basis? And because of that, now all of a sudden these massive plot points open that literally make all of your characters even better and makes the story even better. So one of the other plot points, and one of the things I wanted to talk about and how deep into world building I got, was the plot point of, and it's not even really a plot point, it is a throwaway line that I wrote. And the way that I wrote it, I initially didn't really think much of it. So it is a lady, Dianath, who is in chapter 2, and she says to Lara, she says, your accent, and at the time she was like Aberrogue, and Lara was like born and bred. And I got to thinking, I was like, okay, well, if Lara has an accent, I need to figure out a way, right, to kind of like pull this together. And so of course I went down the rabbit hole of like, she was Scottish at first, and then I was like, that doesn't make sense. And I, not only doesn't it make sense, but I can't write in a Scottish kind of accent the whole time. I was like, okay, let's do like an Appalachian thing. Cool. I can drop some, you know, letters here and there, and then we can go from there. And then I was like, well, eventually it got to like the Spanish, Portuguese, and Japanese thing kind of being combined. And I was like, now it's Aberrosian, right? So it went from Aberrogue to Aberrosh, and then went from Aberrogian to Aberrosian. So, you know, putting a little spice on it, right? But then I got to thinking, I was like, it would be really, really cool if on Lara's phone screen, this language was there, which means I'm going to have to build this language. And so what I initially did was I quite literally went through and wrote it in English first, and then went and ran it through a translator. I translated it from Spanish, Portuguese, and Japanese all together. And then I just started like changing way things look or sound. And then that got to me adding how things pronounced. And then it got to grammar rules, and then I created an entire grammar rule sheet and a dictionary. And so at some point in time, I will be able to actually write any of my scripts in Aberration. And that, I don't know if that makes me a genius or an idiot or just insane. But either way, now I can write this language in the actual webcomic. And while nobody else will probably be able to ever read this language, I will publish the stuff. But even if you read the language, it's just like, this is a part of who Leira is. That she quite literally is this person. She's from this region. The whole region speaks. It's not just the city of Aberosh, it's the whole region. So Kalem, and then Jorn and Forsyth, they all speak this language. And this eastern side of Procreate Kingdom speaks this language. So it is one of the largest representations of another language in this world. And also in this kingdom that a lot of people speak it, but then people are very much bigoted towards it. So people will make fun of your accent. They will be mad that people are speaking in Aberration. And there's some real life examples of this in different countries and different places in the world. People will get mad if you speak certain languages. And while it's ridiculous to me, this is a very real thing. And so this would translate into a fictional world. People would act like this. And so you kind of get to see this dichotomy of how like language is used in Talia, but also among people. But then the other side of it is Leira kept her accent. At one point in time, she tried to drop it. And then one of her friends was like, no, screw that. You're going to keep that accent because, one, your dad doesn't want to have his accent. And don't you hate your dad? And Leira was like, yeah, he's like super neglectful. Like he doesn't take care of me. And eventually she emancipated herself. But also it was a connection to her mom still. And her mom had left. And she was angry about that. But she still had that love for her mother because she didn't understand why her mother had left. And she wants answers to that. And it's been 13, 14, 15 years since that happened. But at this point, she at least will have some form of answer, right? Because she wants to seek her mother out. And so now that she's going to seek her mother out, she's like, okay, I'm going to probably get an answer to that. And this will be a connection to the woman that I still somewhat love, even though she left me when I was a child. But because of all of this, it kind of explained so much about her as a person, what she holds on to, what she values. And it literally was just ground level, just building up like, okay, what is this? Why is this? Okay, so she has this accent. Okay, now we need to explain why she has this accent. And now we have this other language. And now I can add this into the story. It's part of this world building effort. And so it can also explain, in the future when two characters are having a conversation and they're speaking this language and other characters don't know, and you can kind of keep certain things hidden. Or maybe they don't know another character does know this language and didn't say anything and sabotages the plot, the plan. But this wouldn't have been a thing if everybody just spoke the same language, right? So world building doesn't have to be this top level crazy like wormholes got opened and this is how they got opened. It can literally just be like, well, every day they eat an apple and this is the orchard that they eat the apple from. And the orchard has an importance because it's the king's orchard. And, like these are things that can inform what your plot is and how your plot kind of develops over time, while also kind of keeping your characters, their personalities and the actions that they do very consistent on why they do it. And so world building doesn't have to be scary. It can be a very, very simple process. It doesn't even have, you don't have to create another language. You can just simply simply have like an explanation of, okay, well, cars in this world, they fly. And this is why they fly. And this is how our people get into cars. And boom, this explains so much about the cars, the world, You can explain that the world is in the sky, buildings are in the sky, and the surface of the world is uninhabitable because of this, and this. These are things that world building can explain, and just a simple day in the life can help that explanation. So don't be scared to world build. You will definitely get more out of it than not world building. And honestly, world building can pull your plot into some very, very fascinating and fun places that maybe you didn't even consider going into, because you had not, world built and thought of these things until you sat down to actually do some crazy day in the life kind of stuff. And with that, my squids, I am done. This was the retrospective for not all of chapter 2, but pretty much 2025, just trying to look back at what this whole year was. There was a lot of learning in this year. A lot of things opened up. I'm back doing YouTube because of the schedule change, so that has definitely helped me. Figuring things out with my webcomic, where I want to go with the webcomic in the future. Chapter 3 is literally right around the corner. The cover is finished, and then the script for it is solid. The Aberrosian language is now, solid, so I can literally write in it anytime I want, pretty much. Other things that, I've been able to do is just being able to do studies of, how bodies look, characters look. I feel like it's been easier to execute a lot of things because of the schedule change. And then just figuring out, things with like dialogue boxes, caption boxes, and stuff like that, I feel like will elevate a lot of my webcomic, make it look better and more vibrant, and more kind of like, not in your face, but more like something somebody really wants to sit down and just like read. Not saying that they wouldn't before, but there was some stuff that I was happy with and some stuff I just was not happy with. And now I feel like I'm getting into the groove of, all right, this is how this can look and how, it can feel overall. So this retrospective has been very helpful for me, just being able to explain to you guys exactly what it is that I've been kind of thinking about and doing over this last year. And hopefully this next year, 2026, for the webcomic and just like my art in general, just ends up being more elevated. More like there's things that I really, really want to focus on and really want to like drill down into and kind of get right. And hopefully 2026 is the year that I start doing that. But if you guys have been working on webcomics, I'm always down to talk webcomics. I'm always down to talk art and comics and everything. Leave a comment, or, shoot me a message. I'm on Threads. I'm on Blue Sky. I have a Facebook, YouTube, obviously. So anywhere that you guys want to message me and we can just chat comics, we can chat art, I'm all down for it, man. Like I love talking about this stuff. It gets me fired up. I love reading comics. I have a whole, host of graphic novels over here that I'm about to dig into, that I literally ordered a year ago, 2 years ago, something like that. I don't remember when I ordered them. It took a very long time to get them. But I'm about to dig into them. I really want to have like a slew of like hours to sit down and just kind of like drill into them, because I love comics. I love the fact that comics are something unlike video games and unlike movies, where you can live in that moment with the panel, the dialogue. Even after you've read the story, you can go back and you can look at that panel and just live in that moment for a little bit. And I feel like you can't really do that with the movie or a video game, because you kind of like, the moment has to come and go. And comics kind of have that special place. Novels don't even really have that special place, because you have to read a couple pages to be able to get the moment again. But a comic, you'll have a panel, and that panel you'll fall in love with, and boom, you're in that moment. And that's the only moment that really, really matters, right? So anyway, all of that said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your year. This is, the new year is right around the corner. So hope you have a wonderful rest of your year. Hope your holidays have been just amazing. I will see you guys next year. The next video, we're going to be talking about some crazy drama. There is some stuff I've been sitting on for a couple weeks now that I really got to talk about. And we might have to talk art drama about a couple different things in one video, because these people is out here losing their mind. They are absolutely nuts. Straight bonkers. I don't understand people. You don't understand people. We don't understand people. Anyway, I am out of here. I freaking love you guys. Hope you guys have a rest of an amazing year, and you have the start of an amazing next year. And if I don't get to see you for a while, just stay safe. People are crazy out there. Anyway, I love you guys. I will see you next time. I'm the prize winning squid, and I'm out. See ya.